Hey, friends, this is Jill Bond, and this is a bonus episode of the podcast called Find Joy No Matter What. And my guest today is Cathy Motley-Fitch, and this will be one in a series of Joy Stealers bonus episodes. We'll hear the stories of people who have been through some really tough times and learn about how they found joy in the midst of those tough times. So Cathy, let me introduce you, is an amazing singer and performer. She's a voice strategist. She's a speaker and an advocate for positive change. She wears many, many hats. She's a very busy lady. But I asked her to come on today to tell her story about her newborn daughter, Lola, who passed away just days old, and to share with you how she found joy, unbelievable as that sounds, in the midst of such a tragic loss. And I want you to know that whatever is happening in your life, whether it's the same kind of situation or whether it's something totally different, something tough you're going through, I know you will be encouraged by what Cathy has to say and by her story. So Cathy, welcome.
Thank you, Jill. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy for you. I love that you are doing this podcast and your books and finding joy, because when I think about joy, I think about you. I've known you for so many years, and I just always think about you. You bring joy to everything that you do and everyone that you have contact with. You must know
That's
that. So I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful.
Well, I told somebody the other day, I said, I think my purpose in life is to just throw confetti. That's it. That's
Right.
pretty much it. So anyway, yes, I've known Cathy since she was, as I say before, a pup. So it's been a long time. We have a little bit of a history.
We do. We've done a lot of singing and playing together.
That's right. So Cathy, tell us your story. Let us in on your story. And after you tell your story, and even in the middle of it, if you want to talk about some other things, that's fine. But I have a few questions for you and we'll talk about joy.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, as you said before, I am a performer. I'm a classically trained vocalist. So I spent a great deal of my life traveling around the world on luxury liners. I always say in false lashes and fishnets is how I spent a lot of my 20s. And I would be on the beaches of Mykonos during the day, and then I would be on stage in sequins in a spotlight at night.
Nice.
It was a really adventurous life, non-traditional, very, very fun. Met many, many people, and just had a really happy-go-lucky life, is I guess the point. I came back to Richmond as I was in between contracts to hang out with my family for a little bit of time, where I met my husband, who also was visiting Richmond. He had quite an exciting life in San Diego. He was here applying for jobs with his family. We met at a local gym, believe it or not. And then
it happens.
It does happen. It does happen. We courted and dated. I went back out on the road. I was doing some national tours, and we courted long distance. And then about a year and a half later, we got married. Once we were married, after a couple of years, we finally decided that we've had enough. How much more travel and happy hours and just, fun stuff can we do? It's time to start a family. Not that family's not fun. But we decided to start a family, and we were pleasantly surprised to find out we were pregnant with twins. Even better, they were boy-girl twins. So Alan had his boy, and I had my little girl. Grayson was going to be my son's name. It was very old Southern Grayson Howard. And then I knew from the time I heard Barry Manilow's Copacabana, that my daughter's name would be Lola. And that's the truth. Barry Manilow was my dad's favorite artist. And so I grew up with Copacabana, and I knew I would have a little showgirl. So that's how Lola got her name. So we knew Alan worked at VCU Hospital. He's an orthopedic physician's assistant. He worked there, and he continues to work there. He's now on the executive committee. And I should say he'll get embarrassed, but he just got nominated as one of Richmond's top docs. So that's very exciting. He just found
there you go. We'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Okay, please do. Please do. He'll appreciate it. But he worked at VCU, and I transferred my care there because they had just built a brand new state of the art NICU, neonatal ICU, and we knew with twins most likely that I would go early. They would come
Mhm.
early, and they had just built this beautiful center. Alan worked there. We could handpick our staff. It was a perfect scenario. So we were very happy with that. Around 27 and a half, almost 28 weeks, I started experiencing some discomfort. My dad drove me down to the doctor, and I was shocked to be told I was in preterm labor. I
Wow.
didn't feel that different, but there was just something not quite right. Sure enough, I was in preterm labor. So they admitted me in the hospital for the next 5.5 weeks,
Mm,
hospital bed
mm,
rest.
mm.
That was quite difficult in itself because I felt fine, but the babies, what you don't know, there's actually a period of time when you're pregnant with twins. It's from, I think it's 27 or 25 weeks to 31 weeks. That's very um, dangerous, or you have to be really careful in that time because you feel great. You're over the morning sickness, you're through it all, and you feel pretty good. And so you start being more active, and they tell you be really, really careful right there because you don't want the babies born quite yet.
Right.
So I made it till almost 32 weeks. I remember it was a Friday morning, and the doctor came in and she said, "The babies are ready. Would you like to meet them today?" And I said, "Yes." Yes. So we finally got to meet Grayson Howard and Lola Jaden. They were 3'7" and 3'4". So they were small, but they were not too small. They were admitted into the NICU. They called them feeders and growers, which is a term in the NICU for infants that just need more time to feed and grow, to mature. Their brain, heart, lungs, everything checked out fine. So we felt really good. We spent many, many nights in there. Well, not that many nights, but we spent many hours, I should say, singing, singing lullabies. We played reggae in the room. Jamaica is a very special
Right.
place. We had gone to Jamaica while I was pregnant with them, actually. And we did kangaroo care where we kept them on our skin. You put them under your shirt so that they can regulate their heartbeats to yours. The NICU is pretty scary. All of the alarms and the sounds, and preemies themselves, they're so tricky because they're beautiful and they're perfect, but they're small. And even though they were quote unquote healthy,
Mhm.
you're not in the ICU if you're perfectly healthy. And so I need to say that because it's very important. It's very
Mhm.
important to note that. So after about 5 days, there were a couple of times when Lola's heart rate would drop. My mom is a nurse, and she was the only person we allowed in the NICU. I didn't want anybody in there. We kept them in their isolates. Nobody could come in. I didn't want anybody to breathe around them. But she asked the nurse a couple of times, "Her heart rate is dropping. Are you sure that's all right?" And they assured us it was fine. And it is what preemies do. We know they do that. They're trying to grow
Mhm.
and regulate. So she had asked that question, but we were assured they were all right. Around day 5, 6, the nurses, frankly, were pretty sick of me being there all the time. And so they asked if they kindly suggested that I go home and get some much needed rest. They said, "Cathy, there's not going to be any rest once the twins come home. So go rest now." I was very reluctant because I'm a bit type A. But as I said, Alan worked there, and he was a floor below, so he could get up there at any point. We had handpicked all of our staff. We knew
Wow.
everyone. So yeah, I mean, we really felt very comfortable. So he took me out in the wheelchair, and they said, "Go home and treat her like a princess. We'll keep an eye out on the babies." So that night I worked in the nursery and we had dinner. The next morning, I woke up around 6 suddenly, and I had this feeling about Lola. And I've always found that so interesting. Your gut feeling, your gut is never wrong.
Right.
And I wasn't too worried about Grayson, but there was something about Lola. So I called and spoke with the nurse, asking about her. And she said, "You're just being a first time worrywart mother. She's fine." We've got her. She's fine. The babies are doing great. I felt comfortable, went back to bed. I called several times throughout the day, and there were no complications. Everything was fine. Around 6 o'clock that night, I called, and the nurse asked if I could call back a time later. They were really busy at the moment, which I didn't think too much of. I waited a couple hours later, around 10, when I was going to bed, and this time the resident answered the phone, and she said, "Lola's feeling a bit punky tonight." Punky? I didn't understand. Okay. And she said that they had intubated her. I didn't know what
Mm.
intubation meant, but I knew it didn't sound good. And
Mhm.
why on earth didn't we get a phone call? Because I had
Right.
called several times throughout the day. So she said to go back to bed and that everything was under control. I got in bed and I asked Alan, what does intubation mean? Well, you can imagine. So what intubation means is when they place a tube and help
Right.
breathe. Alan jumped out of bed, called the hospital, and needless to say, we jumped in the car, flew down there as fast as we could. It takes about 20 minutes from our house, and I think we made it in 10. When we got there and when we walked in the room, and so in these particular rooms here in the NICU, the babies have their own suite, which is part of the reason why we opted to go there. Grayson was over on one side and Lola was over on the right. So they were there at the same time. And I leaned over and Lola looked
Mm.
nothing like the baby I had just left 24 hours before. We were completely shocked. We were unprepared for how ill she was at the moment. That was not the impression we had been given. And I'll never forget watching a nurse. She was trying desperately. She wouldn't leave Lola's side, and she was trying desperately to get a blood sample, and she had sweat just dripping down her nose. I can see her. Her name was Sophia. She was so beautiful. I think of her as Mother Earth, and she kept trying. She said, I won't. She was from somewhere in Africa, and she said, I won't leave my babies.
Mm.
And so then I reached in and I started helping her massage Lola's foot to try and get a blood sample. It ended up being just an unbelievable night of medical errors, of miscommunications, of
Mm-mm.
misdiagnoses. We asked several times for an attending to be there. Where was her attending? He was aware of everything that was going on, but at VCU, it's a teaching hospital. So the fellow was there, the resident was there, the medical student was there. There was a team there. There wasn't my attending, my number one doctor, the top of the top that we wanted there. And we asked several times. And there are many things that many details that we could talk about. And Alan and I do now, we speak about patient safety and medical errors.
Right.
And so there are many things that we can go into. But when I asked for the attending to come in, I was taken out in the hallway and given a lecture on the chain of command about why they couldn't go above the fellow to request the attending be present. And I share that because now so much, being a singer and being a vocalist, now my life has morphed into teaching people how to speak up and
Right.
how to use their voice, because there's so many tentacles right there just in a chain of command lecture for me to trust my gut, and for anyone listening to request your doctors, request what you want, communicate with your
Yeah.
team. And then for medical professionals that could be listening, to not be afraid to escalate and to speak up.
Mm.
So several more things cascaded and occurred. And around 6 o'clock that morning, they had to rush in to do emergency surgery on Lola. We were standing outside the room, um, signing consent forms. And then all of a sudden, lights started flashing, and she started to code.
Mm.
And so they started to do CPR on her. Another crazy facet of this story is as they went in to start to do CPR, or before, when they were trying to do the emergency surgery, they opened up the tray, the surgical tray, and there was no scalpel. There was no scalpel in the tray. So it became this movie-like scene, this cluster of people rushing, running around, trying to find a scalpel to do an emergency surgery. No one could find one. I went running through the halls, screaming for a scalpel. Does anyone have a scalpel? I ran into the labor and delivery floor. And as I ran in, I watched in horror as the doors locked shut behind me. And then I'm banging on the door because I can't get back to my daughter. It just was unbelievable, the things that occurred. So within a few minutes, someone happened to be walking by, a medical student who had a scalpel. He flashed his badge. We went running into the room, and then, like I said, the code had started. And they performed CPR on Lola for about 25 minutes. And then finally, I was the one that had to make the decision, and I had to talk to the emergency team and ask them to stop resuscitating my daughter. So it's a very shocking story. There are lots of things that went wrong. Again, like I said, that we speak about in our future talks, but it was just something that is just unparalleled in my life, and I will say this to you at the moment that Lola died. So as we're focusing on joy, and there really isn't any right here at this point of the story.
Right,
There
right.
just there is none right here. But interesting, right when Lola passed, at the same exact moment, across the room, Grayson let out the loudest cry. And it's true. It's true. He let out the loudest cry. And in that moment, I thought, okay, I'm holding my daughter. And I kept looking up at the ceiling, going, what just happened? Over and over, I kept saying, what just happened? This is possible. I knew she would wake up. I knew she would wake up, and it wasn't happening. It's a very surreal feeling. And then Grayson pulled me out of the moment, and I ran over there to Grayson to make sure that he was all right. And he was. So that is the part. So that's how that part of the story,
Right.
part of the story went.
Well, then there's the grieving process after that. Everybody's timetable is different. It's a part of you forever. It's not like you get over. And I think anybody who's listening understands, anybody who's grieved, as you told me once, loss is loss. So I'm sure a lot of people can understand. You had a unique description of your grieving process. Can you talk about that a minute?
Well, it's interesting because, Alan and I handled things so differently. There's so much in this story because we did have a twin. And so there were some people who said, well, at least you had a twin, at least you had a. And I was like, I couldn't believe that, because then it made it very, very difficult. The guilt in itself that you feel when something happens like that. But then the guilt that you feel, I have this baby that needs me, but there's a part of my soul that's dying.
Right.
And then there's a marriage that's crumbling because I absolutely didn't want to go. I had my OB at another hospital. Well, now all of a sudden Alan wants me to go to his hospital, and I do that. Well, then, so now that it happened there, then of course it's Alan's fault in my mind. So there's so many, there's anger, there's blame. And Alan, within 2 weeks, he was back to work. And, we speak together often, which I think is always so interesting because women talk, and we share. We share, and the men don't always share, but he does. He does. And I feel like his story is so important because how was he able to go back to work in 2 weeks? I was ready to kill him. I wanted to burn down the hospital. I was very vocal, as I am. And he went back to work, and he says, I just needed normalcy, and I wanted to focus on the life that we had now. He wanted to focus on Grayson. He wanted to focus on our marriage. Well, I couldn't focus on anything except for anger blame, retribution. I wanted everyone to know that that hospital's a bad hospital, and which, let me say, and I will say over and over again, I do not feel that way now.
Hmm.
I do not feel that way now. And Alan said from the very beginning, he would say, would make me so mad. Bad things happen in hospitals. Bad things happen, period, to good people.
Right.
But bad things happen in hospitals every day. He was like, you can't find me a hospital where things don't go wrong. And he goes, but I believe in them. These are good doctors. This was a bad, bad sequence of events that occurred. And I've
Hmm.
often called it the perfect storm
Mm.
because so many errors occurred. So many happened that I feel now that it was placed in our life because we were meant to talk about it to help prevent. So when we talk about grief and the grieving process, I was angry. Alan was very, wouldn't speak about it too much. I knew something was wrong. I knew something wasn't right. He couldn't admit that something wasn't right. He
Mm.
just knew something, bad things happen sometimes, and it happened to us. And then he was ready to move on. I
Right.
wouldn't let it go. I wouldn't let it go. So then we had our own demise between the two of us, the blame, the grief, the self-hatred, the trying to manage Grayson, him wanting to smile, me not wanting to smile. I mean, it was a mess. I started to focus on Grayson. Indeed, like he said, I started to focus on that little baby. And I was determined that every time he saw my face, I would have a smile because he was so beautiful and he was so perfect and he had just lost his sister. And I was so busy being angry. So, what you're referring to when I talk about grief,
Right.
I talk about often water and the ocean or the river. We spend a lot of time on the water. And when I look at the river, when I wake up in the morning,
Hmm.
it's flat, it's calm. The other morning, there was this beautiful red, pink, it looked like a canvas, this amazing sky. And I was on my paddleboard and it's just flat. Well, then around 11 a.m., it starts to get a little bumpy and it starts to get a little rough. Then by 2, there are white caps everywhere. I couldn't imagine being out on the water.
Yeah.
And then around 7, every night, it's usually on Sunday nights whenever we have to go back home and prepare for
Of
work, usually
course.
on Sunday night at 6, it's flat again. And so the grieving process for me is very much like an ocean or like a river. And the waves, they come and they go. And in the beginning, they were much more frequent than they are now. Now, when the waves come, it's still very painful. And I can go back to that moment like that.
Hmm.
It doesn't cut quite as much. And this has been now, it's been 11 years, Jill. So
It's
it's
been
been
a
a long,
while.
it's been a long time. But I still, especially with having a twin, Lola's still around when we see Grayson.
Hmm.
I don't see Grayson and see Lola, but it's a reminder. It's certainly a reminder. We have kept her we have kept her very much a part of our family. We didn't
Hmm.
hide what happened. The boys know they have this beautiful guardian angel. They know that a preventable or sequence, several preventable errors occurred that took their sister, but they see us now sharing her story to help other people. They see us finding, the part of grief. The way I had to do it was I had to stop asking why.
Hmm.
And Pastor Tony said this at her funeral, actually. Stop asking why and start focusing on what. And I heard it that day, and then I forgot about it. I didn't want to think about it. And then I found that again. Why? Because I spent so much time. Why me? Why us? We did everything right. We knew everyone at the hospital. It was infallible. There's no way that something could go wrong. And then in a matter of 6 hours, she was gone like that.
Yeah.
No one expected it. The doctors didn't expect it. My OB, when she walked in the room and saw me, with her, she fell to her knees. It was just such a shock that this had happened. But so we focus on purpose. I focus on purpose.
How did you get to that point? Well, let me ask you this first. Did anybody try to make you feel better sooner than you were ready to feel better? Everybody wants to make you joyful before, quite frankly, maybe you were ready for it. I don't know if anybody tried to, you know,
Yeah,
come on.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
And my husband is one of them. And so it's double edged. I mean, he wanted to move on with his life, but it was too soon for me. It was too soon for me. And that's something that's so important for people to know is you have to, it's okay to give yourself permission to grieve. It's okay to be angry. It's
Mhm.
okay, to take that time and to self protect. He needed people around him. I didn't want people around me. I didn't want anybody around me. I needed my time to be by myself. However, I would slowly go out. One day, I remember he asked, Grayson was still in the NICU, and Alan said, "Let's go on the boat with everybody." I looked at him like he had six heads. I'm not going on the boat. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? But he said, "Will you please just do this for me?" And I did. And I smiled. Now, that was maybe 6 weeks after my child had just died, but it got me outside. We had wonderful friends that were careful with us. They were careful with me. They loved us, they protected us, but they said, "Come on, let's go." But then they knew like I couldn't do it like everybody else.
Right.
My mom is so wonderful, and I found so much strength through her, and she and my dad. But my best friend had a daughter who was about to be baptized, and they called and asked if I would sing at the baptism. Her daughter was maybe 8, 9, something like this beautiful young daughter. And my mom said, "Why don't you do that? Why don't you do that? That might make you feel better." Now, in retrospect, what on earth about that would make me feel better? What on earth would make me feel so? I struggled with that because I felt so guilty to say no, but I said no because
Mhm.
I knew. Here's the other thing: is grief counseling is something that we did, something that took me a little while to admit that I needed or that it would even help. But my grief counselor had said to me, "Give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to allow your emotions. Give yourself permission to grieve and give yourself permission to protect yourself. If you don't feel like going to a birthday party, don't go to a birthday party. If you don't feel
Mhm.
like singing, which is a whole nother story, I did not sing for almost a year. I didn't have the radio playing. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle any type of music because music is something that brought me so much joy, so much joy. And then it was gone. After it was Christmas of that year, and I was comfortable in protecting myself, and mom had said, "Go back to the choir. Why don't you start singing it?" And no, and no, and no, and no. And then eventually around Christmas, I said, "Okay, let me try it."
Yeah.
And I started to sing. That was a huge moment. But
Boy.
oh, it was, I mean, the floodgates opened. I was singing in the choir. So I was singing for someone that I felt had let me down, which is God.
Mhm.
And so I knew that I had this gift of song. I
Right.
knew that I had loved that gift and I had treasured it, but he let me down and he took my daughter.
Right.
So there's no way that I could do that. It took a long time. And so when it was amazing to me, I remember that first choir rehearsal and I started to sing and it was okay. It was okay, not to mention the support that I received from the church. And we, Alan and I, we're not. every Sunday. We're not there every Sunday. We traveled a whole lot. In the summer, we go to golf cart church down the river. We're not there all the time. It's a real thing. But our church, even though they didn't know us as the every single week, they did not leave our side. They
Mm,
brought meals. That sense of community, they prayed for us. And I found my way back.
yeah. In your own time, in your own time.
In my
What
own
tell me about your relationship then with God, how that evolved, because I think anger is a very natural response, to tragedy. But then what happened that it evolved into a place where you could actually sing to him?
I think, like I said, it took a lot of time, it took a lot of prayer, it took a
Hmm.
lot of tears.
Yeah.
It took my mom saying, "You need to." She was very trepidatious. She tread very lightly because you don't know what to say to someone, and in an instance, you knew what I was going to do or say or scream. And she very gingerly said to me, "Maybe you should start thinking about someone else instead of just thinking about yourself." And of course, I looked at her like, "What are you
Ouch.
saying? What do you mean? I'm thinking about myself." Uh, and she said, "Just think about it. If you just start doing something for somebody else." And so that's when the choir started. That's when I recorded a lullaby CD for
Mm,
Grayson. I had this child and that was just to sing lullabies. But I did, and I stood in the studio and I had tears streaming down my face as I sang. But we took a portion of, when we sold them, we took a portion of that and gave it to the March of Dimes, and that was doing something.
mhm.
I fought with God over and over, and so many people, you know, so many people. You'll ask perhaps, what do we say, or what not to say, or what to say when someone's
Right,
going through
right.
that. And people would say, God has a plan. God has a plan for her, or God needed her. And I'm going to say right now, at least for me, that is not the thing to say,
Mhm,
especially not at the beginning. Because do I believe that now? I believe that now. Did I believe that then? Absolutely not. What better plan could there have been than her to be right there with me in our family? What better plan could there have been? So when people, would say all of these things about God, it made me insane. It made me
mhm.
so angry because there wasn't a better place than right here with me. But over time, as I started focusing on other people, as I started being kind to myself, as my grief counselor would always say when I left, be kind to yourself, Cathy. As Alan and I were destroying each other with my anger, it really was me. My child couldn't flourish. My kid, I was so angry at God that then I got tired of the anger. I mean,
Uh,
maybe that's it. It took so much energy to be angry. And through counseling, Alan and I went together. And she said to us, I did grief counseling on my own. Then we did marriage counseling as a whole. And that's what turned everything around
mhm,
because we all grieve differently. Alan grieves quietly, men stoically, women angrily, yelling, talking. And so then when we came together and we would have to sit there on the sofa, we would put chairs across from each other and our knees would touch. And we had to look at each other. We'd have to repeat back what each other said. We still do this to this day when we have problems, which is daily over the kids. But no, our knees, our knees would be touching and we had tears streaming down our face. And he said, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "I'm so sorry." And in that moment, we heard each other, we looked at each other, and you could feel each other's pain. And we knew, right? I knew then that we could do it.
Mhm.
And let me go back to my grief my grief counselor to say that on that first day, because I didn't think I needed it, I didn't want to go. I sat down across from her and I said, all I need to know is, am I going to be okay? Am I going to be all right? Will I make it to the other side? And she smiled. She's a very gentle woman. She smiled softly and she said, I can tell you 100% yes, you're going to be okay. And when she did that, it was the first step of releasing the anger. And I
Mhm.
thought, okay, I can feel it. I can do this. And for me, also, this is another. The doctors had given me a bag full of pharmaceuticals to help me get through the
Mhm.
pain, and they said it would just take the edge off. And I'm not here to make a judgment on any if people do or don't.
Right.
For me, I never touched it. I kept it in the cabinet just in case, but I never took anything to ease the pain, because in for me, I felt like, if I do that and I dull this pain, when I'm done at the end, if I run out of prescription, then that pain is still going to be there at the end. And I'm a very direct person. Let me feel it, cut through it, and get to the other side.
Wow.
And I did. It was very painful. There were many days I remember just sobbing on the floor of the shower, asking why, asking why. But when she told me that I was going to be okay, and then flash forward, Alan and I do marriage counseling, and he says,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, and I say, I'm sorry. And then we start focusing on the present.
Mm.
We start focusing on what we have right now in front of
Right.
us. And then we started to focus, what can we do? What can we do with this story? And it took months of me requesting medical charts, going through them, and realizing that many things had gone very, very gravely wrong. Ellen couldn't handle that, um, wouldn't even acknowledge it or look through them for about 6 months. And when we started to change, when I started to hear God whisper a little bit here and there, when I began to smile at Grayson, when I began to let our friends in on my pace, my terms,
Right.
we started to find a purpose, and it started to change everything. Alan he read the medical charts, and then he realized that, no, yes, bad things happen, but these bad things that happened to us and to our daughter were preventable. So then he actually wrote a letter to the hospital. He wrote a letter to the hospital and hand delivered it to the CEO, the CMO, CNO, and said, we don't know that you know this, but this is what happened to our daughter. She passed away on May 29th. No, I'm sorry, on June. They were born on May 29th. She died on June 5th. And this is why. These are the reasons we have found in this chart. And so when we did that, within 24 hours, we got a phone call from the hospital who said, let's talk. Can you come in? And so we set up a meeting, and we told them the full story. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. There was, I had asked for about 25 people to be present, and they
Mhm.
called me and said, Cathy, we understand that you want to do that, but we think we can accomplish more with a smaller group. I said, okay, we can have, your small group of 4, but I also want you to call in the chaplain just in case I kill someone. I need someone to, I needed someone there on my side and to keep me calm. And so I'll share this. I had the opportunity. We asked for the attending who wasn't there that night, who it was just a bad stroke of luck, of bad luck, a stroke of bad luck that he wasn't there. There were many things, he was handing off to someone else. There was a vacation involved. There was a flight. There were all of these things. And at a teaching hospital, they're giving students and fellows enough rope, to learn. This time it didn't work out so well, but I asked him, in front of his colleagues, if you had done everything right, if you had been there that night, would my daughter be alive? And he took a deep breath and he looked down at the table. And then he looked back at me and took a breath and he said, "We'll never know for sure, but most likely, yes." And in that moment, Jill, I, all anger vanished. All anger vanished. This man admitted, took responsibility for not being there. We don't know. I mean, Lola ended up getting very sick within those 24 hours and in a very small baby. I don't know how she would have recovered. Should she have gotten sick at that point? No, that's for sure. But he took responsibility and it released everything for me. And it turned life around. It turned life around. I started when I was able to walk back into the church, when I was able to sing, when I was able to find a purpose for my daughter's life. And the hospital took responsibility as well, which is especially 10 years ago was not normal practice, to be transparent. Medical error, I should have said this at the top of the show, medical error is the third largest cause of death in our nation. Number 1 and 2 are heart disease and cancer. And most of us, unfortunately, know someone that has gone through that and has taken lives. If you start digging a little deeper and asking questions, you'll find that medical error has probably affected someone in your world. It's frightening. And so when something like that happens, and when with Lola, we ended up discovering there were about 7 medical errors that had occurred on so many different levels. We knew then that God probably did put this in our life. It's so interesting to me that as a vocalist, someone who has relied on my voice all my life to bring joy and to entertain, that it happened to me because I'm able to use that voice. It's not in the way that I ever thought that I would. But I believe very much so that this happened to me because I'm meant to share her story to help save lives. Lola is present every day in our life. I don't see this beautiful little child. I don't get to have that experience, but I have a different experience. I have a different experience. And when I talk about her now, there is so much joy. When I focus on her brother, Grayson, there is so much joy. We live in the present. We talk about Lola. They see us go and do something.
Right.
And so the grieving process, for me, it took time. It took lots of time and lots of self-protection, but I had to feel it. I had to be angry. I had to go through all of it. But then I started to focus on other people instead of myself.
Right.
I used fitness. I had to get outside. I remember being so angry as the seasons would change and the birds would chirp and I just wanted to shoot them all. How can you chirp? How come the sun rises today? How is the sun rising? But then I started to participate in life. I started to go for walks. I started to smell. I would look at the cherry blossoms. I would walk my dog and I started seeing joy because I'm focused on the now.
Right. Right. That's amazing. And you and Alan, actually, you have been to, I don't know how many hospitals, giving a presentation about this, telling your story and inspiring them. Am I saying this right?
You are.
Talking about medical error and encouraging them to pay attention and be motivated, I guess.
We do. And
be
we
careful
talk
that.
about communication and leadership, escalation. It's just so funny how my career has morphed into teaching people how to speak up, people that want to do something, because I feel like all of us are going to go through something if we like it or not. You've either already been through something, you're struggling with something now, or you're going to go through something else, or it's just a part of life.
Right.
It is a part of life, and there are different degrees of severity. But like I told you before, pain is pain and loss is loss. We did a medical mission in Africa. maybe 5 years. And I will say, year 2 was really, really hard. Year 5 was really hard. Yesterday was hard, you know? I
Mhm.
mean, you just don't know when it's going to hit you, but I can put it in perspective now. And when we did this medical mission in Africa, Alan went as a physician's assistant so he could administer medical education and medical practice. What on earth am I going to do? Well, I had been going to counseling for with my grief counselor, and we went through marriage counseling, and so I asked if I could offer grief counseling to these villages in Kenya, because in that culture they don't speak, they don't talk about it, they keep it inside, they move on. And so I would hold a little small, and maybe like we there would be people down, hundreds and hundreds of people, lines deep of people waiting for medical care, and maybe 5 or 7 would come over and sit in this circle, and they would talk about their pain, they would talk about their loss, and they were so amazed that they were given the opportunity to do that because they
Mhm.
weren't supposed to.
Right. Right.
So I've carried that with me. They knew loss far more than I could ever imagine. And so I will never, mm, I don't want to say belittle what I went through, because there's
Okay.
not, that is
No small thing.
right,
No small thing.
right. But they had multiple, just multiple deaths and major, major tragedy in their lives. And every single one, they would say, but I thank God every day.
Yeah.
I thank God. And I didn't get it until recently. And I get it now because life is so short and we're going to go through something. And so if you live in the past, if I live just focused on Lola and her death and what happened and the suffering and the pain, that's where I'm going to stay. But if I can look forward, how can I take her life and what happened to her, keep her ever present, keep her beautiful, keep her memory alive, impact change,
Mhm.
do something, then you find joy. I think about,
That's amazing.
I don't know, if I'm saying this right. I don't know if I, can say this well, but I was thinking earlier about Jesus. And I was thinking, if we spend all of our time focusing on the crucifixion, which we do, I mean, we spend a lot of time on that. But then I feel like I can, that brings me great deal of, takes you to a very contemplative state and a lot of, just very thoughtful time. But if I focus on what he died for and the love and the joy and the, you know, that is where I focus. And
Right.
you can find the joy in Christianity. You can find the joy in your life, finding purpose and making a difference and not just getting stuck on the pain, but
What an
focusing on.
amazing message. So many people need to hear that. I needed to hear that. I haven't been through anything close to what you've been through, but so good, so much goodness in what you shared, and I for one appreciate it. I know that everybody listening, as I said before, has been encouraged and inspired and just helped by this. There's so much power in you're not alone. There's so much power in I was so mad. There's so much power in knowing that all the feelings that you felt, that just that they're validated, and that there can be joy. It may be for a moment, it may be in the present. You may have to do a little mind trick to focus, and not deny your pain. But what you've given us today is just priceless. So
Well, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you so much.
and I've, to speak on the joy, I mean, I really do feel that through this experience, and I'm not blowing smoke. I mean, I'm wide open and I'm very honest. I mean, this was very, very painful. But today, our family is so happy and joyful. I feel like, you can turn on the happiness. I can turn on the happiness when I'm on stage, but
Mhm.
seeking joy, finding joy is something that you have to do. You look for it. You look for it and you'll find it if you look for it. But so often we stay in our grief, we stay in our anger, and we don't look for it. We stop looking and we sit. We just sit in it. And there's a time for that. There's no doubt. There's a time for that. But then you rise up and you look for the joy, and it's there. It's all around you. I can talk
Mhm.
about Lola every day. It keeps her alive. It
Mhm.
keeps her alive. It keeps her memory alive. And she impacts change. She impacts change. And so it's doing something. It's finding a purpose
What
and
an
finding
amazing,
joy.
amazing thought. I end every podcast with always remember, if you're looking for joy, you'll most likely find it. So thanks for
Aw.
that.
That's
That's
right. I
great.
believe it
That's
100%.
great. All right. Well, we will wrap it up now. But again, thank you so much, Cathy. I can't wait to share this with many, many people, both in just audio form and with this video also. So thank you so much. Keep feeling that joy.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you so much for being here,
All
having
right.
me.